Hi everyone, it's Audrey and welcome back to Chapter and Converse. Today's video is going to be my October reading wrap-up, rewind, and I read 6 books this month, which not the worst thing to do, but certainly not my best month, and I actually think it's probably the least books I have read in a month all year. But I read some really good books, and basically life just got in the way of my reading time, and baseball got in the way of my reading time. So if you watch my other videos, you heard me talk about this. I'm still recovering from the fact that the Astros lost the World Series, but it was such an incredibly intense, well-played, back and forth, could have gone either way type of World Series. So in the grand scheme of things, it was a great series, but it was genuinely heartbreaking to watch the tides turn in Game 7 the way that it did. So anyway, I didn't read all the books that I wanted to read, but I did read some really good ones, and we're going to talk about them. The first book I read is called I Will Make You Pay by Teresa Driscoll, and this is an arc I got off of NetGalley, but this actually came out earlier in October, so it is available. And this is a thriller police procedural, and I had not heard of Teresa Driscoll before. I hadn't read anything by her, but I saw the book obviously on NetGalley and it appealed to me, and I got it. And I have to say, I was so pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed this book and with how quickly I read it. And this was a book from the get-go, out of the gate, like I was in. Like the opening line of the book, to paraphrase, is basically this woman, Alice, is a journalist, takes place in the UK. She gets a phone call and the guy is like, he's basically like, I want to slit your throat with cheese wire. And she's understandably completely freaked out, and her colleague who sits across from her sees her get this phone call, sees her freak out, and he's like, we need to report this. And basically the police disregard it as kind of a hoax, and even though there's some other creepy things that are happening, they don't put much weight into it. But Alice is freaked out. So her boyfriend hires a private investigator who is actually friends with one of the detective inspectors who's kind of quasi on the case, and the two of them sort of work together, and the PI works with Alice to try and figure out who this stalker is, because the stalker starts to escalate. And this was kind of like a wild ride of a book, and there were definitely like some great twists. There was like a definite red herring that I knew was a red herring, but still enjoyed sort of where the story was going. I liked the reveal, I liked the ending, I liked the characters, like all in, this book was such a pleasant surprise. So if you're looking for kind of a fast-paced ride by maybe someone who's new to you, I would definitely check this book out. And I'm interested to see what else Teresa Driscoll, how I stutter over this name, writes, because I thoroughly enjoyed this one. And this, I would say, was a month of pleasant surprises. So this first book got me off to the right start. So after something super creepy, I decided I needed like a little bit of a palate cleanser. I needed like to come down off the roller coaster ride. And I finally picked up Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And if you saw my video about the writing course I did online with her, you heard me talk about this book a little bit. And this is the second to last of her books that I have to read, so I only have one more left. And this one I was really anticipating because it sort of has that sliding doors concept to it. And this is about a woman named Hannah, and she has kind of moved around a lot. She's like 29 years old. She's a little bit lost in life, and she winds up moving back to LA, and she moves in with her best friend and her best friend's husband. And the book opens on her first night back in town, and her best friend gets a whole bunch of people from high school back together again, because this is where they grew up, and they're gonna like go out and sort of welcome her back to LA. And while they're at the bar, sort of the one that got away in Hannah's life, her ex-boyfriend, Ethan, I should know this name, shows up at the bar. And Ethan and Hannah dated in high school. He was a year older. He went away to college. They wound up breaking up, dating other people. Hannah went to college, and they haven't seen each other in basically like 10 years. And there's a lot of unresolved feelings and questions and everything in between. So the way this book takes off is at the end of the night, when Hannah and her best friend are kind of ready to leave the bar, Ethan asks her to stay. And then in one scenario, Hannah stays at the bar with Ethan, and in the other scenario, Hannah leaves. And the book in alternating chapters shows what happens in Hannah's life based on which decisions she makes. I love a book like this. I love, you know, it's got this tagline, what if everything that is possible happens? And I absolutely loved this book. And I feel like that should come to no surprise to anyone, again, who's listened to me talk about Taylor Jenkins Reid, because she has such an incredible way of crafting a story, of creating characters, of building deep emotions, of going to such incredible places with heartache and friendship and relationships and family, and really exploring so many different emotions and the complexities of people's individual sort of relationships with themselves and relationships with others. And I mean, I cried, and I was happy, and I was heartbroken, and I was cheering, and like all the emotions. This was such an incredible book, and I loved it. And I am hard pressed to pick favorites of hers, but I would say, I would have to say, you know, like my top 3 of hers are Daisy Jones, Evelyn Hugo, and this. And it just was such a beautiful book, and both stories end, both paths, you know, end at the end. Like there's a conclusion to it. So stupid. There's an end at the end. There is one storyline that I did favor as far as the end of it, but at the same time, I enjoyed both of them very much. And I love how she wove the different perspectives and the things that are sort of inevitables, and you know, how making a choice can change your path, obviously. And, you know, it's not that it's just that it's down to fate or, you know, what's going to happen, but sort of how things transpire even in the lives of other people, and how she reaches certain decisions on her own, even though she had to take different paths to get to certain places. So I'm being very cryptic because I also don't want to give anything away. But if you are a fan of Taylor Jenkins Reid and haven't read this one, absolutely pick it up. If you haven't gotten into her yet, this is a beautiful place to start. All of her books are standalones, but I thought this was so well crafted, so well done. You guys know, I love her style. I love her voice. I love watching the evolution of her writing and her trying different ways of writing. And it's everything, all the feels, absolutely love this book. The next book I read is another arc, and it is Good Girls Lie by J.T. Ellison. And this actually comes out, I want to say December 31st. It comes out at the end of the year. And I am a definite fan of J.T. Ellison. I was excited to get this book, and I really enjoyed it. And this is a boarding school book, which I love. I love a boarding school book. I think it's because, like, I just went, you know, to a very good public school. I had a very good experience, middle school, high school, all of it. A great educational experience. But I think I remember seeing Dead Poet Society, and, well, this is apples and oranges to what this book is, but how they went away to, you know, that boarding school, and it just seems so picturesque and beautiful, despite what happened with Neil, but you guys know what I mean. But it was always just such an intriguing world to me. So I just love the concept of a boarding school, and any book that has a boarding school in it, I am down for the ride, and you'll see more of that in a minute. But this is a book, so it's sort of mystery thriller-y. I feel like these words can get tricky when you're describing a book, because it's not like fast-paced thrill ride the way I Will Make You Pay was, but there's definitely like some mystery thrill to it. So this book opens up with the body of one of the students being found hanging from the front gate of the school. And it's sort of like her head is down, her hair is in her face. She's kind of a little bit difficult to identify, I would say. And the dean of the school comes and sees her, and of course recognizes her instantly, but they don't reveal to us who the person is. And then we go back in time to the beginning of the school year, when one of our main characters, Ash, shows up for school, and kind of like her car is pulling up to the school. And she is a new student transferring in sophomore year, and we basically follow 3 different perspectives of what life is like at, it's called The Good School, Goode. And it's in Virginia. It's somewhat isolated. It's an all-girls school. There is some sort of mystery to the school and some history to the school where a girl was murdered 10 years ago. There's some complicated history with our characters, and we get secret societies. We get sort of that horrible teenage girl, mean girl hazing stuff going on, and something just is not quite right, and bad things start to happen. So we're trying to figure out sort of who the dead girl is, and you're trying to kind of figure out how everybody connects and who's doing what and who's unreliable and who we can trust and who's being manipulative and sort of what all is going on. But it was a very, very enjoyable book, and I liked the varying points of view. There was one trope that I wasn't a huge fan of, but it didn't take away from my overall enjoyment of the book. And I would say all in, like it was a really enjoyable, fun ride is how I would sort of describe this one. But I enjoyed the twists and turns. Again, I loved the secret society-ness of it, the boarding school thing. I keep going back to, like, I really want to pick up Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo because we've got the secret societies there at Yale. I haven't done it yet, but stay tuned, or if anybody's read it yet, let me know. But I really enjoy J.T. Ellison's writing. I think this could be thoroughly enjoyable for anyone looking for a good thriller come the end of the year. And like I said, I will write down below, but I'm pretty sure this comes out on December 31st. But loved it. Love me some teenage stuff, you guys know. I enjoyed the dean. I enjoyed a lot of the characters in this one. And there is a little bit of police procedural to it. And there's also, rats, I'm blanking on her name. Hold on. And I'm back. So one of the detectives, a woman named Kate, kind of comes onto the scene partway through the book, and I really enjoyed her as a character, and I have no idea if there's any possibility that Kate could like get a book of her own or sort of spin off into a series. But just as a side note, I thought she was a great character. I liked sort of her relationships with other people, how she was investigating, just sort of everything about her as a character. I found her really intriguing and I found myself wanting more Kate time on the page and like wanting to understand more of what Kate's story is. So if J.T. Ellison is listening, she's not, give Kate her own book, please, because I want to read it. But I really enjoyed this one. I would highly recommend it. So if anybody, again, is interested, boarding school, teenage stuff, girl drama, secret society, murder, this is a good one to pick up. So I did mention in one of my other videos that I did attempt to do Spookathon. I did like a whole TBR, I think of like 12 books for it, which was such a joke. I read one. I finished one book during the week of Spookathon because my head was all over the place. But the book I did finish is The Chain by Adrienne McKinty. And this is a book that I was so excited to read. I've already talked about it in other videos, but basically the premise of this, which I think is genius, is we open with a mom finding out that her daughter has been kidnapped. And the only way she can get her daughter back is to pay a ransom and then kidnap somebody else's child. And when that person pays the ransom for their child, her daughter will be released. And that person in turn is going to have to do the same thing. And it is the chain continues as people pay ransoms and kidnap other people's children. And it is such a like deliciously messed up premise. And I loved it. And sort of the lengths that people will go to for their child and to save them, and sort of the horrible things they will do and how they will morally compromise themselves and the risks they will take, and just sort of what it brings out in people, I thought was so fascinating and interesting and like messed up beyond all recognition, don't get me wrong, but I really enjoyed the story. And what I will say is interesting, I'm having a day, I'm blanking on people's names. Rachel is our main character, she's the mom. So I really enjoyed Rachel, and she enlists the help of her brother-in-law And then her daughter's name is Kylie, and we get things from Rachel's perspective and Kylie's perspective, and just sort of, you know, who's behind this, what is behind this, what is motivating this, and like, oh my God, what am I gonna have to do next? So it's interesting, when I had talked about this, I wanna say it was my TBR video, or maybe it was my haul video, and someone had commented on it because they had read it, and they were like, oh, I'll be curious to hear what you think about the ending. And you know, you're always like, who knows how an ending's gonna go. So what I will say about this book, and I get why people are talking about the ending, and I'm not gonna spoil anything, but what is interesting / what I found frustrating about this book is I thought probably the first 2/3 of it was incredibly well done, smart, twisted, interesting, page turning. I didn't know how they were going to wrap it up, how they were going to resolve it, how they were going to explain things, sort of where these characters were going to go. And then it's like the book took a turn, and it was like a completely different book. And we went from this definite like psychological thriller into what I felt like an action adventure movie. And I didn't love the ending. And I didn't find it all to be realistic. And I mean, suspension of disbelief, yes, across the board. But it seemed like it was like watching two different movies, or like reading two different types of books. Like I really feel like the author just switched gears far too dramatically. And while it was completely page turning and enjoyable from a reading standpoint, it's not a 5-star read for me, because I felt like it was like a genre switch in some ways, and not in a way that I enjoyed. So I was bummed about that, because I really think, not that I know how I would have ended the book, but I didn't think it needed to go the way it went, because it just felt like two different books. I don't know how else to describe it other than to say it felt like I was reading two different books, and I enjoyed the first book better than the second book. So all in, I do think it's enjoyable, it's page turning. I still think the story concept of this is incredibly brilliant, and I don't think people will be disappointed in that. And again, if anyone has read this one and did enjoy the ending, or didn't feel that we were sort of reading two different stories, I'd be curious to know. But it felt a little bit too like action thriller, not horror movie in the sense that like that there's like a man with a mask, you know, standing at the end of like a dark street, like in Friday the 13th or Halloween or something like that. But it sort of amped up into like okay, we just went to like this completely twisted concept that did feel like maybe it was something that could happen, to like, this is a little bit ridiculous. So no. But anyway, all in, I enjoyed it, page turning, definitely an interesting read. Be curious to see what else Adrian McKinty does, but I do think it's worth the read, but unfortunately not a total 5-star blow me out of the water read. The next book I read was a complete random, did blow me out of the water, and I wound up finishing it after Spookathon, but wound up reading it sort of as a book that I never would have read. And I was literally sort of like watching YouTube videos while I was doing stuff at home, and I was watching Julie from Pages and Pens, and she was talking about, you know, I don't know if it was like a wrap up or whatever it was, but she was talking about books she had read, and she mentioned this book called Rules for Vanishing, and this is by Kate Alice Marshall. And this is like it's a YA kind of like horror ghost story. Holy crap, guys, what just happened? Creep fest like nobody's business. And I'm a little bit of a scaredy cat when it comes to horror and ghosts and things like that. And I am one of those people who will watch some horror movies, even though I know they're gonna like keep me up at night sometimes. And interestingly, like sometimes I can watch a movie or like a scary television show or something and be more okay with it than a scary book. And I talked about this months ago when I started rereading Patricia Cornwell's books, and I was reading her first novel, and it freaked me out so much I couldn't read it at night. And this was the same thing. And Julie had said like, this is like super creepy, and it was freaking her out. And I love Julie. I love a lot of her recommendations. I love her honesty about books and reviews and sort of everything. So when she said that, I was like also really intrigued, and I thought, well, I might be a little bit too nervous to do it, but you know what? I literally like went to Barnes and Noble, treated myself, and bought the book. And this book, you guys, it's so good. I never in a million years would have picked up this book. I don't even think this book would have crossed my path had it not been for her. And I talked about it in another video, but in case you missed it, I'm just gonna read the little snapshot on the inside. No giveaways ever. And it says, once a year, a road appears in the forest. At the end of it, the ghost of Lucy Gallows beckons. Lucy's game isn't for the faint of heart. If you win, you escape with your life. But if you lose... So this is a story about a girl named Sarah, and her sister disappeared a year before. And sort of on like the anniversary, I guess I would say, of her sister's disappearance, sort of once a year, supposedly, a road in the woods opens up for you to go into it. And she is adamant about finding her sister. And her, along with a group of her friends, who are kind of treating this as like a joke, but they're gonna go for Sarah and be there for her because they were all friends, and no one ever found out what happened to her sister, all meet in the woods that night and go kind of on this search. And this book is like, it's like a little bit Blair Witch Project, it's a little bit ghost story, it's a little bit like best friend group, but like kind of things have changed over the past year and the friend group has kind of broken apart, and there's friendships and relationships and unresolved feelings and resentments and sort of all of this stuff bubbling under the surface. So it's like a huge sort of exploration of friendships and relationships and family. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. It is told in multiple timelines from multiple perspectives in multiple media. So what we wind up having is there are transcripts from conversations with the police. There's transcripts from, so it sort of opens, it is Dr. Andrew Ashford is investigating the incident in Briar Glen, Massachusetts. And he is interviewing some people. There are text messages from their phones that we see. There is sort of like transcriptions from videos that people took on their phone. And it's just so interestingly done, like literally in the sense of having like exhibits, you know, like information torn from somebody's notebook, having the text messages, having the interviews, having the varying timelines and the varying perspectives. And there were so many times during this book, and it's so incredibly well done, the way she sprinkles little breadcrumbs and sort of gives you little tastes of things, but then, and it's like how subtly it's done that you don't pick up on everything. Like you don't realize that you're missing something. You don't realize that the author is kind of messing with you a little bit, but then something would happen and I would be like, wait, did I miss something? And I would like flip back and I'd be like, nope, they haven't mentioned this, but they're mentioning this, and how does it connect? And wait, why am I getting this now but not before? And it really messes with your head too. And I loved it. Like it like messed with you in the best ways, but I could not read this before bed, which is why it took me a little bit longer to read it. But man, this was so good. And I am so surprised at how much I enjoyed this book, because again, this is a whole lot of things that I would never ever read. I was not a big Blair Witch person, not a huge horror person, I'm not a huge ghost story person, but everything about this book I loved. I didn't know where it was gonna go. I didn't know what was gonna happen next. You just have no idea what's coming. So you guys have to read this book. I would love to know if anybody read this book, because it was so surprisingly, incredibly enjoyable. Man, I'm like still thinking about it, and I would love to see this as a movie. I would love to see this as like a Netflixy type of show or something. I think the possibilities could be endless for how they could bring this to the screen, but like, color me a fan, because this was great. The last book I read is Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. And I also talked about this in another video. I had originally started to read this during Spookathon, and what I found, I was originally reading it on my iPad. And this is a boarding school book, so we're going back to that trope that I love. And this is told in two different timelines. So there is a mystery that happened back in 1936. It's definitely 1936. at Ellingham Academy, 1936. And the headmaster of the school, his wife and daughter are kidnapped and go missing, and he gets a ransom note and has to pay lots of ransom, and they are not found. The mystery is sort of quasi-solved but not solved. Someone admitted to it, but it doesn't seem like that person did it. There's so much mystery around this, around who really done it, and we fast forward in time to present day, and a girl named Stevie winds up getting accepted to Ellingham Academy, and she is obsessed with this mystery. And the ransom letter was signed Truly Devious, so that's where we're getting the name. So she's obsessed with the Truly Devious case, and she wants to go to the school with the one objective of solving this crime. And we go in forwards and backwards. We see the two different timelines. She's new to the school. You kind of have this unique kind of cast of characters and other students and faculty, and it's sort of new mysteries that are happening there, and sort of how everybody interconnects, and again, those little breadcrumbs from the past about the mystery. I'm doing a crap job explaining this one as well. But what I was finding when I was trying to read it, so anyway, back to this part, is there was so much going on that I was having a hard time reading it on my ebook, because I wanted to go backwards to look at things. And I was reading it, I was trying to like read this at night and like read this during the day, and then it was just getting to be too much trying to keep both stories straight. Then I tried to do the audiobook of this, but it was the same thing. There were just too many characters. I was having a hard time keeping up with it, so I wound up getting the book, which is fine, which is totally fine. And I'm glad I did, because I really enjoyed it. But this was, again, another surprising, this is a YA book, surprising story in that I really enjoyed the characters and the writing. It's smart, it's funny at times, it's very sort of unclear what's happening at certain points, and again, who you can trust. It's the relationships between all of the characters as we're in the past, trying to figure out how things connect back then, and a lot of mysteries to solve. And my only beef with this book, this 420-page book, is this book is like season 1 of The Killing. And if anyone has watched that show, which I love, mind you, but it was all the posters, you know, first, you know, kind of first case, first episode, the whole thing is based around who killed Rosie Larson. So she's a teenage girl, she has gone missing, they find her body, and the entire first season is trying to solve the mystery of who killed Rosie. And anyone who watches the show knows that at the end of season 1, they don't solve the mystery. They leave you with a cliffhanger. And as someone who watched that show live back when it came out, I was filled with rage because there's no conclusion to it until the end of season 2. This book leaves you on a cliffhanger, which was so annoying because I just wanted to know what was going to happen. And the only upside is that this book came out a couple years ago, and it's a trilogy, and book 2 exists. So I had to buy book 2. So like, Maureen Johnson is one of the smartest people ever, because this was an incredibly engaging, well done, fun book, and you have to buy this book to find out what happens next, because it leaves us in an unclear place. So I haven't started it yet. It just came in the mail. The 3rd book in the trilogy comes out in January, I want to say. So if this ends on a cliffhanger, I'm gonna have like 2 months of waiting for that to happen. But it is, it's really fun, it's really smart, and the Truly Devious riddle is kind of loosely based on Dorothy Parker. There's just so many great references in here, but it's like, should we use a rope or a gun? Knives are sharp and gleam so pretty, poison slow, which is a pity. Fire is festive, drowning slow, hanging's a ropey way to go. And it kind of like goes on and on. But I loved it. I loved it. I'm not actually full of rage, but I'm kind of full of rage. But when I got to that last page, and then the end of this book has a preview of the next book, so I didn't realize, I was thinking like I was thinking I had like 15 pages left, because I didn't realize there was a sneak peek of the next book in the back of this one. So when I got to the end of the story, I was like, how was it at the end of the story? How's at the end of the story? How's at the end of the story? I don't know if anybody else felt the same way. I really enjoyed it. But man, I was on the train reading this in my commute, and I literally wanted to like scream on the train, but I couldn't because I would have been that crazy lady who was screaming on the train. But I don't know how my November reading is gonna go, but I do think I'm gonna work this into it somehow. I'm so good about saying I'm gonna read books and then I don't, but I'm very curious to see what happens next. I am in the middle of reading Someone We Know by Sherry Lapena right now. Lapena? Sorry. Thoroughly enjoying it. All I want to do is go back and be reading that, but it is November 2nd, so it's day 2 of National Novel Writing Month. I'm 250 words shy of my word count for today, but it's just Saturday afternoon, so I have time to get that done too. So anyway, I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to be reading in November. I did do a nonfiction November video. If you haven't seen that, I'll link that down below also. So I will let you guys know. November might be less than 6 books at the rate that I'm going, but who knows how these things are going to be. Let me know what you guys read this month. Like I said, I didn't read a ton of books, but I was very pleasantly surprised by the ones that I did read, and I'm glad I took risks and like picked this up, because I had heard about this book quite a lot, but dismissed it because I thought it was going to be too young for me, and I was worried that it might be, you know, some way that I've read has felt targeted towards, they're all targeted towards YA, but I feel like sometimes with like certain cartoons and movies, like there's stuff in it for a younger audience, but there's stuff in it for the adults also. But like I completely enjoyed this book, which was a pleasant surprise. Glad I picked it up. I'm super glad I picked up Rules for Vanishing. This was an incredible surprise. I'm glad I snagged I Will Make You Pay from NetGalley, so thank you again to NetGalley for that, because that is a book I normally would not I think have read or known about. So it was a good month of risks, and risks that paid off. But let me know if you guys kind of had any surprising books this month that you read, or what some favorites were, or if you read any of these, if you have some thoughts on The Chain, please, anyone, let me know what you thought about the ending of it. So many thoughts. So I am going to cut this short because I need to get back to writing, and I will see you guys next time around. Bye, everybody.